Welcome to the deep dive.
Okay, we're jumping right into a legal case that's really uh, stirred things up online and in legal circles. We're looking at the Diddy sentencing for that Mann Act violation. And what makes this so, well, remarkable is the sentence itself, 50 months. That's what, 4 years and 2 months in jail? Our sources are calling this basically unprecedented for the actual crime he was convicted of.
That's exactly right. And that's the puzzle we're trying to piece together today. We've got the source material, a detailed report from the courtroom, and it gives us a look into the judge's thinking that some have called, radical or even based on BS. So our mission here is to really trace how the judge got from point A to point B. How did this conviction lead to that sentence?
Okay, before we trace it, let's just set the stage. What exactly was the conviction? What would normally happen in a case like this? Right. So he was convicted only on the Mann Act violation. Simply put, that's about transporting someone across state lines for prostitution. What's really key here is that the jury acquitted him of the heavier charges, like trafficking, which specifically need proof of force or coercion. And since this was his first conviction, the standard sentencing guidelines point to a level 12 offense.
Level 12. What does that mean in actual time?
Typically that means something like 4 to 10 months. Maybe if you really stretch it with enhancements, you could get up to, say, 14 or maybe 18 months max. So yeah, 50 months just doesn't fit the standard playbook at all.
Okay, so here's where we really need to unpack things. Because the judge got to that 50 months by reportedly considering stuff Diddy was actually acquitted of. Is that right?
That's the absolute core of the controversy. The defense lawyers argued, again and again, that the jury specifically said no to force, no to coercion, no to trafficking. They said the transport itself was found to be consensual.
So those charges should have just been off the table, right?
Logically, yes. But the judge found a way. He used a couple of legal justifications.
Okay, what were they? How did he bring that acquitted stuff back in?
Well, first, he pointed to a case, U.S. versus Vaughn, from the Second Circuit. It suggests that, in certain situations, judges can consider acquitted conduct.
Okay.
And second, maybe even more significantly, he used Section 3553A of the Sentencing Code.
3553A, what does that allow?
That's the big one. It essentially gives judges leeway to go outside the standard guidelines if they think it's necessary for justice. It lets them consider, and this is the quote, even matters that cannot be considered for the guidelines.
Wow. So he used that as permission to basically bring back all the testimony about alleged abuse and coercion that the jury had already heard and rejected.
Pretty much. He essentially said, I know the jury didn't convict on this, but I heard the testimony, and I believe it's relevant context for the transportation charge.
But wait a second. Doesn't that kind of undermine the whole point of having a jury? If they say not proven and the judge says, yeah, but I think it happened anyway, so I'll sentence you for it, how does that even work legally?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's exactly what our sources are debating. The judge framed it as overlapping conduct.
Overlapping conduct?
Yeah, his argument was, sort of, that the alleged coercion, even though acquitted, still overlapped with or provided context for the transportation itself. It's a creative interpretation. He essentially sentenced Diddy as if he'd been convicted of the trafficking charges he was acquitted of.
Okay, so that's how he justified considering the acquitted behavior. And once he did that, the next step was figuring out the severity, right? Specifically, the victim count. The defense argued 0 victims for the transportation charge.
Exactly. Based purely on the conviction consensual transport under the Mann Act, the defense said 0 victims.
But the judge didn't agree.
Not even close. This is where the numbers just explode. The judge ruled Diddy had, wait for it, 10 victims.
10? How? Where did 10 come from if the conviction was just about one person being transported?
Okay, so the list included Cassie and Jane Doe, who were central figures in the trial testimony. But then, to get to 10, he added 8 men who were reportedly hired as escorts or prostitutes.
8 men? Hold on. Were they ever listed as victims in the actual charges he was convicted of?
No, never. That's the really critical part here. Diddy wasn't convicted of transporting them or anything related to them. Their involvement was just part of the background testimony, painting a picture of his lifestyle during the trial.
How could the judge just declare them victims for sentencing purposes? What was the legal basis for that?
The judge basically said he could use what he heard in court. Just the testimony itself. He felt that was enough to label them victims and then apply sentencing enhancements based on the things under Section 3 of the guidelines, like having an aggravating role or targeting vulnerable victims.
Even without a conviction related to them?
Even without a conviction. He essentially bypassed the jury's findings, or lack thereof, regarding these 8 individuals. He used testimony about unproven, unconvicted conduct to trigger the enhancement for having 10 or more victims.
And that enhancement is a big deal in the guidelines.
Oh, it's huge. It's a massive multiplier.
So that initial level 12 conviction, where did it end up after all this? After adding acquitted conduct and these extra 8 victims?
It shot all the way up to level 27.
Level 27, and what kind of sentence does that usually mean?
We're talking serious federal crimes there, like major fraud or significant drug trafficking. The guideline range for level 27 starts at 70 months, going up to 87 months.
So the 50 months he actually got is still less than that range.
Technically, yes, it's still a downward variance from level 27, but the point is the judge successfully used these controversial steps to raise the possible sentencing ceiling dramatically, like 4 times higher than where it started.
It really sounds like the judge was determined to reach a specific outcome here.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Our sources highlight another really critical point, maybe the most precedent-setting part, the judge's definition of coercion, especially regarding Jane Doe.
Yes, this is absolutely key. Because the logic used here, well, it could potentially ripple out way beyond this case. It involved Diddy and Jane Doe's relationship, described as a situationship. Diddy was paying her rent, reportedly $10,000 a month.
And the issue was when she apparently stopped complying with his expectations, he threatened to stop paying that rent.
That's the scenario. And the judge's ruling was that this threatening to withdraw financial support if she didn't meet his expectations, constituted coercion.
Usually criminal coercion involves, threats of violence or something more direct, right? Not just stopping payments in a relationship. Right. The judge used a really broad interpretation of coercion, pulling from Black's Law Dictionary. He focused on the idea of conduct being uncompelled. His reasoning, essentially, was that she was compelled to comply because losing her housing was such a severe consequence.
Even though the jury found him not guilty of criminal coercion specifically.
Exactly. He applied this broader, almost civil law understanding of coercion to justify enhancing the sentence in the criminal context, despite the acquittal on the actual coercion charge.
Wow. If you take that logic, think about any relationship with financial dependency. A partner paying the mortgage, someone supporting an elderly parent. If they threaten to pull that financial support unless certain expectations, maybe even unspoken ones, are met, could that now be framed as coercion, maybe even abuse?
That is precisely the concern raised in the source material. It's a huge shift. It potentially moves the legal definition of coercion away from just physical threats or illegal acts and into the messy territory of financial power dynamics within personal relationships.
So if the judge could have gone up to 87 months based on that level 27 calculation, why land on 50? Did he say why?
He did, actually. He stated pretty clearly that his goal wasn't just punishment based on the guidelines, but deterrence. He wanted to send a message to deter others. Using the acquitted conduct and boosting the victim count helped him justify a high number to make that public statement.
Unsurprisingly, the public reaction was intense, very divided. Looking at the commentary our sources analyzed, what stood out to you?
Well, it was completely polarized, and often people weren't really arguing about the specifics of the conviction itself. You had one side calling it systematic non-justice, even invoking white supremacy. Commentators like Tariq Nasheed argued there were, quote, technically no victims for the actual crime Diddy was convicted of. Their view was the system sort of railroaded him using these unusual legal steps.
Okay, and the other side?
The other side felt 50 months was way too lenient. They often blurred the lines, talking about all the allegations of abuse, domestic violence, things he was not convicted of or was acquitted of. They saw the 50 months as a slap on the wrist, considering the totality of the testimony presented, regardless of the specific conviction.
So lots of strong feelings, but maybe not always focused on the precise legal maneuvers we've been discussing.
Exactly. But for us, trying to understand the how, the key takeaway is clear. This unusually high sentence for a Mann Act first offense happened because the judge controversially used acquitted conduct and significantly inflated the victim count, using legal tools like Vaughn and 3553A in a very aggressive way.
So to recap the mechanics, a level 12 conviction, which should have meant months, not years, got blown up to a level 27 framework. And that happened by the judge deciding to factor in conduct the jury rejected and adding 8 people as victims who weren't part of the conviction charge at all.
Precisely. And looking forward, beyond the sentence length itself, the truly provocative piece might be that definition of coercion. We saw a judge expand it to include threatening to withdraw financial support in a personal dependent relationship. So the question to leave you with is this. If courts start applying that logic more broadly, what happens to the legal understanding of financial dependency in relationships? How does it change how we define abuse or coercion when it's tied not to physical force, but to financial control within a family or personal dynamic? That precedent could have really long-lasting, maybe unforeseen consequences.
Yes, only thing that I'm worried about, punch you one of these pussy ass niggas in they mouth. Then they film and they'll upload it. Suckers do anything for that clout. They'll trick you out of your position if you ain't gained up and you ain't here watching out. Internet bloggers, internet gangsters, who the snitches? I can't tell. On the dead homies and enemies podcast, the only podcast that I know won't tell. But I ain't tripping, I just pay attention to my own little business and I get the smell. I'm in another state, making another plate. Big plat place on my state. A plush hotel, just counting mail. I do this shit and I do it well.